The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. After this, Jesus and his disciples crossed the sea again, and they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When he got out of the boat, people at once recognized him, and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces, and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. The Gospel of the Lord. So earlier this week, all of our ELCA Youth Gathering contingent arrived in Detroit, and they began their week of service and learning and faith formation with 30,000 of their closest Lutheran buddies. And as they did this, they continued a tradition that they've had for the last couple of these every 3-year events. They somehow managed, in the midst of these 30,000 closest Lutheran buddies, to immediately find the presiding bishop of the ELCA and have a picture of her with the group and post it up on Facebook. Almost immediately. I don't know how they managed to do this so quickly. But when I saw that picture posted on Facebook, I immediately recognized everybody in the group, including the presiding bishop. Thing is, I've never actually met the presiding bishop. But in the 2 years since Elizabeth Eaton was elected our presiding bishop, I have seen her picture in lots of different print and online publications from the ELCA. I have been a good doobie and watched the videos that she makes and asks us to watch and listen to when she addresses big issues in the church that she wants us to think about. And I have a bunch of friends who have met her, and they've taken selfies and posted them on Facebook. So as soon as I saw the picture, I immediately recognized the presiding bishop. That got me to thinking, how is it that people recognize Jesus? I mean, how would somebody recognize Jesus in the 1st century? There were no pictures of Jesus that were posted around, and certainly not online. There were no videos of Jesus walking through the various towns doing all kinds of things the way we would watch famous people on the evening news. And there were certainly no friends who were taking selfies with Jesus, and even some of the people, and we don't realize this all the time, even some of the people who were near Jesus when Jesus did some of these miracles that they talk about Jesus doing in the Gospels, many of these folks were not close enough to Jesus to have taken a selfie, or even to have been able to really see clearly who Jesus was and be able to recognize him. That's the reason, later on, when Jesus is betrayed, Judas has to come along with the guard of soldiers to say, that's the guy. Because even though Jesus was in the temple with thousands of other people teaching day after day, the average person did not know what Jesus looked like. So how was it that Jesus was recognized? In today's gospel reading, twice, Mark says that as Jesus got off the boat and was going someplace, people recognized him and ran towards him. So how was it that they were able to recognize him? I suspect that in the abbreviated way that Mark tells the story, most of us think that, oh, somebody saw his face and immediately knew who he was, but really, I think the way people recognized Jesus was not his face. It was rather his behavior and his attitude and the way he treated people. It was those things that helped people to be able to actually recognize Jesus, even if they didn't necessarily know what his face looked like. Because even though they didn't necessarily know what his face looked like, they could start to recognize Jesus by the way he treated them with compassion and he cared about them. The first thing that Mark says happened when Jesus saw the crowds is that he had compassion on them. And he cared about them because they were like sheep that were without a shepherd, and they were harassed and helpless. And that was a different kind of thing. Because most people that would have come through the town, most famous people that they would have heard of, would not treat them like, if they treated them like sheep, would have treated them like sheep to be sheared and fleeced. That was certainly the way the Romans treated them. It was the way the puppet government of King Herod treated them. It was the way a lot of the religious authorities treated them as well. They didn't care about those folks. Jesus did. He actually had compassion on them, and that was different. That was how they recognized Jesus. They recognized Jesus because when he had compassion on them, he didn't just stop and say, "Oh, I feel sorry for you guys. Hope everything goes all right. Bye." He actually sat with them. He taught them. He started to talk to them about what God was doing in their lives, how God cared about them and loved them. And that, too, was really different. Because several places in the New Testament talk about how most of the religious leaders of the time looked at the common folks and said, "You know what? These people are cursed. They don't know the law, which means they don't understand the Bible. And you know what? It's not even worth trying to teach them because they're too dumb to understand." And that's how they were treated. But Jesus sat there and was patient with them and talked to them and helped them. And that was different. And that was how they started to recognize Jesus. And maybe most importantly, Jesus was recognized because he actually cared about their real life, everyday needs. He was not like some of the great spiritual leaders that said, "Oh, we just care about whether or not you have good theology." When people were hungry, he fed them. When people were ill, he healed them. When people were feeling lonely, he became a friend to them. He cared about them in mind, body, and soul, not just the kind of spiritual stuff that a lot of religious people said you were supposed to be worried about. That was different. And that's how people recognized Jesus. You know, it's a sort of bizarre gospel reading we have today, because if you look at the title of it, you see that there's about 18 verses that are missing between the beginning of it and the end of it. What happens in the middle of it is the story of the feeding of 5,000. That is the subject of next Sunday's gospel reading, and the Sunday after that, and the Sunday after that, and the Sunday, which is going to make a lot of fun for me and Pastor Christine to figure out how to preach on feeding of the 5,000 for about 6 weeks running. But whether it was feeding or healing or befriending people, Jesus actually cared about people's regular, everyday needs. And that was something they hadn't experienced before, and that was how they started to recognize Jesus. So that also raises another really kind of important question. How do we recognize Jesus in the world around us? And even more importantly, how can Jesus be recognized in us and through us? Because sadly, there are a lot of people, and you see them all the time, and you read the stuff online, who think that Jesus should be recognized through some kind of ultra-pure doctrine. We got all the right answers about Jesus, and that's how you should recognize Jesus. Or, Jesus should be recognized through stringent moral codes. If you just behave in a certain way, that's how you're supposed to present Jesus to the world. Or maybe even, there's a certain aloof character that, you know, if you're really into Jesus, then you behave in a certain way and you don't associate with those other people who really don't get with the program. The thing is, as you read the New Testament, those were all the ways that the Pharisees were recognized. They were recognized as people who were too aloof from the crowd to associate with others, who thought that their pure doctrine and their pure moral codes were going to bring them closer to God, and that's how the Pharisees were recognized. It was never how Jesus was recognized. Jesus was and is recognized and wants to be recognized in and through us whenever we, like Jesus, treat other people with compassion. And that includes people we've never met, people who are uninterested in what help we're going to give him, because that's the way Jesus was too. You know, he treated others with compassion, even though a lot of these people that flocked to him, listened to him, and then went, oh gee, thanks, but okay, no thanks. He still treated them with compassion. And he did it even when he was tired and when he was hungry. Because in today's gospel reading, it begins by saying they were doing all this work, and so many people came and ran around, they were exhausted. They didn't even have time to eat. So Jesus says, okay, let's get in the boat and let's go on retreat. And we'll relax for a little bit. And they get to the shore, and they're tired, and they're hungry, and there's this whole crowd. And Jesus has compassion on them anyway, and shows God's love, even though he's tired and hungry, and probably a little bit irritable. I was thinking about that this week when our kids were doing the youth gathering out in Detroit, because a number of years ago they began adding to the youth gathering experience a day of service. So when the kids go out there, they spend one day doing service in the community, which sounds really great, but consider the logistical nightmare. There are 30,000 kids. You got to take 10,000 kids per day, bus them all over the city of Detroit, and have them do all these little projects all over the place. I was an adult leader in 2009 when we were in New Orleans, and it was the very first time we had done this. And I thought, this is going to be a logistical nightmare. This is going to be a disaster, but we'll try it. And somehow they pulled it off. They bused 10,000 kids every day. We went to different sites, we did service, we did cleaning up, we did tutoring, we did all this kind of stuff, and it worked great. And it worked great 3 years ago. And I thought, oh, it'll work fine this year too. And I started to read the stuff on Facebook, and it was a disaster the first day. Probably because the city of Detroit really didn't expect that we were really going to have 30,000 kids there, but I was reading blogs from some of my pastor buddies who said they put us on the bus and we sat there, and we had no food, and we had no water, and we had no supplies to go and do this service. But then I looked at the pictures of Facebook, and we actually did. The kids went out and did it anyway. They had no food, they had no water. I have a picture of one of our kids who's trying to chop through roots to get through, to clean up one of these abandoned lots, and he doesn't have anything except he's got an old shovel, and he's sitting there, which, if you know this kid, he probably enjoyed a lot. They didn't have, and they were tired and hungry, and they did it anyway. And when we do stuff like that, even though we're tired, we're hungry, and we don't have the supplies we need, we do the same kind of thing Jesus did that day on the hill, where he had compassion on people and cared about them, even when he was tired and hungry and didn't have the supplies that he would have liked to have had. That's how Jesus can be recognized in us. Jesus can be recognized in us and wants to be recognized in and through us whenever we simply are people who share what God is doing in our lives with other people. Not going around telling people, let me tell you how God's working in your life, because if you don't know how God's working in your life, then it's clear that you're too dumb or clueless to understand that. I've had a number of people want to tell me that in my life too. That's not what Jesus did. He just sat with people and he talked to them about what God was doing right there with him and with others. And people started to experience God as a living reality in their lives right now. When we do that, we help others experience Jesus. Jesus can be recognized in and through us. And sometimes that means, most importantly, that we make God's love a real, tangible, physical reality in people's lives. We show people that God is not just concerned with what happens to you after you die, but God cares about you right now. If you're sick, or hungry, or lonely, or you need help in any kind of way, whether it's as simple as bringing school supplies for kids that otherwise wouldn't be equipped and ready to start to learn, whether it's making a meal for somebody who needs a meal because they're hungry, whether it's sitting with a friend because they're having a rough time. When we do those things, we make God's love present and physical and real in their lives. We show that spiritual is not divorced from being a real living person right here and right now. Those are the ways that Jesus wants to be seen and experienced and recognized in us and through us. And like Jesus, that doesn't mean that we have to look any different than we do right now. It simply means that if Jesus is going to be recognized in the world around us, it means that we're going to be committed to being people through whom Jesus can be seen in and through whenever we treat others with compassion. Jesus can be recognized in us and through us whenever we're people who share the experience of God working in our lives, even in small ways, with others. Jesus can be recognized in us and through us whenever we take steps to make God's love a visible, tangible reality in the lives of our neighbors.